Excellent, thanks. And I'm recording starting now for to send out to the group for those who couldn't make it today but are interested. All right, next slide, please. So we have a couple aims for our time together. The main one is that you leave this call feeling more informed about both group mentoring and the rollout for hybrid mentoring. Two, that you feel more empowered to share about this programmatic shift with donors and funders in person and proposals. And we know that we don't expect you to have like fluency and competence at the end of this hour meeting, but we want you to start to feel more empowered, and at least we can hopefully identify what else we can provide you as an implementation team so that you do feel armed for those conversations and proposals. And finally, that you feel really connected to hybrid mentoring, to what it is, to the student and mentor experience. And we're going to get to these objectives by providing an overview of group mentoring. Kristen's going to walk you through the curriculum and a session and talk about a student. I'll share some of the high-level impact evaluation in details, and then preview and anticipate what's coming with implementation, and then link you to some resources that you might want to reference in the future. All right, next up. So let's start by defining group mentoring. And this is a definition that actually comes from the field and the literature around group mentoring, which I'll reference again in a minute when we do a field comparison. But group mentoring is a mentoring activity with one or more mentors and at least 2 mentees, and it must involve a group process with opportunities for meaningful two-way interaction between the mentor and mentees and among mentees. And our summer search approach is a hybrid approach to group mentoring. So our students alternate between one-on-one conversations with their mentor and then group sessions with their peers after school that are facilitated by that same mentor. And these are some images from our very first session of junior year with our first group of students, where they were drawing a map to explain the peaks and valleys of their summer experience and use that as a foundation to kick off a conversation with each other about what they learned and what they were carrying with them into school. Next slide. So we know in particular for you as you're crafting proposals that funders are interested in what does the field say about group mentoring and how does summer search stack up? So that's what I wanted to touch on a little bit here. To begin with, the research in group mentoring is pretty nascent. So at the time we started the pilot, it's 4 years ago, or writing the grant was 5 years ago, there were a few reviews about group mentoring in the research around youth development and mentoring in general. And there are 2 main researchers. And one of those main researchers, Gabe Coopermink, in 2016, published in partnership with the National Mentoring Resource Center, literature review citing 42 different articles that had to do with group mentoring and evaluating about 20 different programs that were kind of pioneering group mentoring. And what I want to share here is the result of that review. So really, there wasn't a really comprehensive body of research until 2016 when we were halfway through the pilot. And I say that because, as you'll hear later, this pilot was really born in response to feedback and interest from students and staff rather than the research, but the research that supports and validates what we did in the pilot. Okay, so a couple of things. There are findings that suggest that group mentoring can effectively foster short-term improvements in a broad range of youth outcomes. And this is what we found in the pilot too. So we surveyed students and mentors at the end of every session and asked them for their assessment on these outcomes. Outcomes like how cohesive was the group, which is an indicator of how well a group is functioning. Indicators on self-reflection, on academics, on social capital, and social responsibility. And across all of those, the group cohesion was the highest, but all of those scores remained high across the groups and across years. Second, group mentoring can be effective across a wide range of mentee characteristics. This is also what we found in the pilot. Our pilot students were really diverse. We had 4 different groups from our Bay Area and Boston pilot sites at 4 different schools, range of ethnicities, religion, and races. And across all of them, the students rated their experience and their relationship to both each other and their mentor highly. And so research also points to some isolated findings that suggest group mentoring might be effective even more so for youth exposed to higher levels of risk. And this is interesting as we think about the students that we serve and this expanded definition of thriving, which could change, who we're serving in our program. All right, number 3, program practices that foster peer support among mentors is one area that shows promise for enhancing effectiveness. So what does this mean? So in the pilot, we had one mentor at each site, Kristen and Alyssa, facilitating these groups and holding the relationship with the student. But an emerging recommendation from our pilot is that actually for implementing this across the network, we want co-facilitation for lots of reasons, including prioritizing student safety, but also building that relationship between mentors for feedback, for best practice sharing. So the research aligns with that recommendation to have 2 facilitators per group. And finally, additional relationship processes contribute to more positive outcomes. So the research just says that the process of building relationships with students and mentors adds a whole nother dynamic of benefit to the student experience beyond the content and what they're covering. And that's what we saw with the pilot. We saw our scores for youth relationship building and youth engagement, which were rated by our mentors as consistently high and the highest among all the factors our mentors were evaluating. So those are 4 things that we know from the research, but there's a lot that we don't know because research is just beginning and these conclusions are tentative. So for example, there isn't any evidence we can look to think about what is the right group composition? What's the right duration and frequency or intensity of the group sessions? What is the value or need for formal curriculum, which is something that we built through the pilot. So there's lots of research can't tell us yet. Also, the research doesn't look at long-term effects or findings. And similarly, our pilot only looked at short-term. So what were the outcomes and outputs for our students through college matriculation? Okay, next slide. So that's a little bit about what we can learn from the field. How do we stand out at Summer Search? What makes our application of group mentoring unique? And there are a couple of things I wanted to highlight here. One is that we are among trailblazers for implementing group mentoring. In this 2016 review, they said that an estimated 20% of formal youth mentoring occurs in groups. So Summer Search is among that small number of 20% that does group mentoring as their practice. Next is something that I already shared, that we mentor our students via a hybrid approach with one-on-one and groups. And in that literature review, they looked at 29 programs and only 4 or 14% were hybrid mentoring programs. The rest that they looked at were exclusively group mentoring. The next 2 points on here, you'll all be familiar with because it's something that we tout and celebrate about our program generally. One is that we make a long-term investment in students when our group sessions span the life of the high school program. So beginning in spring of sophomore year through spring of senior year. And in the research, most of the groups were between 2 and 16 weeks. The longest program spanned middle school, 2 years during middle school, but there were only 2 of those. So even in that research among those 29 programs, there are a few that have a long-term investment. And also, like our traditional model, our mentors are paid, trained professionals like Kristen. And there was no other program reference among those 29 that had paid professional staff. Most of them were volunteers, ranging from high school and community volunteers to undergrad and graduate volunteers. And then the final piece that also makes us unique is that we emphasize critical consciousness development in our curriculum, both in the content and the structure. And of those 29 programs included in the review, there was only 1 program, a program for alternative high school students that called out critical consciousness development as one area of focus. And a couple pieces here, just how we're shining a spotlight on Summer Search and group mentoring, hybrid mentoring. On the bottom left, you might recognize this photo. This is from our Marcom team promoting the blog. The student in the center with the yellow jacket is Dee. She is a former group mentoring pilot student, currently in post-secondary, and she'll actually be joining Kristen for that webinar sponsored by Mentor on Thursday. So if you want to hear from her and more from Kristen, tune into that. Also, this week, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, our funders who funded this pilot, are hosting a convening that we'll be attending, and we'll be talking about how we applied hybrid mentoring at Summer Search. And then finally, Mentor is hosting that webinar later this week, and we'll also be presenting at their annual workshop and summit in DC in January about hybrid mentoring at Summer Search. All right. All right, I'll take a quick break here before going into group mentoring at Summer Search to see if there are any questions. And if I can't answer them all, I at least want to capture them here so I can follow up after. Any?
This is Lexi. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Lexi.
Hey. Are we continuing to track the students that were part of the pilot program in any rigorous way that would allow us to see long-term results for at least our small group? Others?
Nope, that wasn't built into our evaluation plan, so it ends. The formal evaluation ends for our students once they matriculate to college.
Okay. And then the second question, which I think you kind of answered when you said there's no research on the best composition, but I was curious when you said that there may be evidence that it's even more useful for higher risk students. I was wondering, like, do those students need to be in a group together, or can it be a mixed group? Like, it shows evidence that any higher risk student, even if they're in a group with some students who are not higher risk, they would have better outcomes.
That's a good question. That didn't come up in the review, and I've linked the entire review for you guys at the end of this report. It wasn't there, so I'm not sure. One specific thing they did call out was African American males, and that being one subgroup that the research said this model was preferential for over traditional like one-on-one mentoring relationships.
Yeah, and I guess that was a part that, especially here in Seattle where we serve lower numbers of students, like we probably wouldn't be able to have a group mentoring group that was only African American males. So to know whether or not that made a difference could help us in getting funding for people who are interested in funding that specific group of students. You can write it down and maybe someday we'll know.
Thanks, Lexi. Yeah, that's a good question. Any more on this part? Okay, I'll keep moving and we'll pause again after the next session. Okay, next slide, please. So some important context is that before we launched this pilot, all of our sites across the network were initiating groups of students for lots of reasons, either to increase efficiencies, to reduce program costs, to respond to what students were saying, which is, I want more time with my peers, or to staff who were saying, I want more time with students in my communities. Groups were happening in different forms across the network. Next slide. So in 2013, Summer Search had a senior director of growth innovation. And at the time, one of the goals was around scaling, one of the goals of our 2013 to 2017 strategic plan. And she launched a listening tour and brainstorming session that resulted in identifying 100 big bet innovations that were then filtered down to 14 and ultimately down to 4. And of those 4, one of them that was socialized and funded was the group mentoring pilot. Right, let's see. Yeah, well, we can move on to the next. I included I'll send this deck after the call, but there's a link here where you can read more details about the history of the pilot. Okay, next slide. All right, now I get to turn it over to Kristen for the part that you're probably most interested in, which is curriculum and students.
Hey, y'all. I know Alex mentioned this already, but this is a lot. So even if you don't have questions, just know this is like the first conversation. And I'm finally here, so I can meet with y'all in person, or maybe not in Seattle, but I can call you. So, okay, let's walk through a little bit of the structure. So the group sessions that we have are held twice a month throughout the school year. So that's September through June. And they're at our schools that we partner with. The space will vary, but essentially it's a 60-minute session that happens after school. And they follow the curriculum that we walk through. And on the off weeks, we check in one-on-one. So I'll do a group session. So my whole group will show up Monday after school. The following week, I'll check in with all of them one-on-one in person over the phone, and then we'll go back to the group. So it's kind of alternating. So as you see, group session attendance is required. The bar that we set was that students couldn't miss more than 2 sessions per semester. And it kind of varies how many sessions there are a semester. So depending on what module we're in, which is what we call the particular chunk of time per semester based on the way the curriculum is outlined. Sometimes it's like 7 sessions, sometimes it's as many as 10. So that kind of varies. And any student who does not come to that group session is expected to have a phone call or some kind of checkpoint with their mentor, so me, during that week. So like Calvin couldn't make it Monday after school because he has to pick up his younger siblings or whatever it might be.
Kristen, I just got a message from Brenda that the SF office lost audio. Maybe we should pause for a second. Let me reply to her and see what's going on. Okay. They're trying to find the dial-in. I'll send that.
I can still hear also, just FYI.
Good to know. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
At least it's not just only a Boston thing.
Did you have any students that missed more than 2 sessions per semester?
Yes.
And were they kicked out of the pilot, or just it worked out?
No, Alex can probably say more. We have like a very clear process for how, if students end up needing to leave the group, what that will look like. Hold on, I'm getting a message. Oh, cool. So y'all can hear me again?
Great.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay. Okay, cool. I don't know where I cut out, but yeah, alternating sessions in a month. So it'll be a group session and then a one-on-one. If students don't make it to the group session, they're required to have a touch point with their mentor. So that's like a phone call or in-person meeting. For whatever reason, they weren't able to make it. As just so you know, my experience as a mentor coming from the traditional model, moving to group mentoring, this was a huge jump because even though it's nice to have some flexibility in the mentoring, it felt really great to have like a research-based curriculum that actually maps along their adolescent development. So everything was very intentional, and it was designed with trying to hit these different benchmarks for what it means for a teenager to work through identity, and now weaving in this critical mentoring, critical consciousness. So every single session, the way it's mapped out, has a particular intended outcome. So that might be like relationships, like deeper relationships, or it might be like having academic resources or whatever it might be. So you kind of, as a mentor walking in, you have this built-in curriculum, you have the idea of what the intended outcome is, you have these activities that you walk through, and it feels, as a mentor anyway, it feels like we're serving the students a lot more intentionally, and you can kind of track their progress looking at these different buckets as opposed to just kind of like do holistic mentoring without any real guideline of what that looks like. So the schools are really different that we worked at. I wish Alyssa was here because she can talk to what Oakland High and Envision Academy were like. But I worked in north of Boston, in Malden and Chelsea High. The schools are totally different. And I think back to Alex's point, it'll be interesting to see how Summer Search decides to redefine the students we serve with this new thriving definition or what that means. But at some point, I'd love to talk to you guys because my groups are just completely night and day. So from an evaluation perspective, it was definitely interesting to see how these outcomes were tracked and like, yeah, what the students said, particularly because I just did, over 20 senior reflections with all my kids in the groups who graduated high school. So I could probably talk all day, but it might be helpful to move forward. Yeah, and I think I've said this to everybody who's talked to me about, but it's just better for us as staff. I'm glad that we made this decision to expand and roll out, you just feel so much more connected to students and their communities. And students are saying the same thing, feeling closer to their peers and to their mentors. So yeah, I think that if for any mentor who hasn't done it, I'm excited to see what it's like for them, because it definitely made my experience at Summer Search a lot better. So we can move on to just the next slide to look at the curriculum. So you guys obviously are familiar. If you move to the next slide, it has the curriculum maps with program manual. So you can see that in Summer Search, we have certain program of what outcomes we're looking our students to get. So that could be certain events or, trip goals and what they kind of get after their summer experiences, wherever they go through. So the curriculum intentionally mirrors that so that we can complement those intended goals. So we start in the spring semester of sophomore year after enrollment that happens in the winter. So right now, you guys know that we're doing presentations at schools and trying to figure out how many kids we're going to get at every school. So we have 5 modules that go from sophomore year through senior year, and each of them kind of have these particular goals that are like big picture arcs that map throughout all the sessions that we do. So some of the things that stood out most to me, because I was able to join a little later in the pilot, is I was working with seniors. So I got a chance to benefit from all the work that the other mentors did in prepping them to have a college going identity and having processed their trips and reflected as a group and really built that like cohesion. And yeah, we spent a ton of time senior year talking about college and what that transition will be like post high school, whether you go to college or not. And yeah, it was really great. So I wanted to be able to, even if we can't have students here, I dug up through senior reflections because I thought it might be nice to center student voice a little bit on this lengthy call. So I pulled up some of their senior reflections around, we keep mentioning critical consciousness, but like, what does that actually mean? So one of the students, Cindy, who is now going to Tufts, her feedback for Summer Search, because I always ask like what worked and what didn't work, like what are things that you don't want us to do anymore, what can we do better, what really worked. And when she was reflecting on the group sessions to this point around critical consciousness, she said, I really like how the group always talks about race. We've talked about drugs, alcohol, safety, harm reduction. All of this was really helpful in me transitioning to college. So that to me is from the student's perspective. And it was really great because she was able to, even though she graduated, she was able to text me and let me know like, oh, I moved in, like, I don't know how I feel about my roommate. And then like a week later, like what are conversations happening in her dorm hallway and like different clubs that she's joining. And it's been really cool to be able to see how the conversations that we had in the group sessions around that transition, like what is it like to go from a really diverse high school to a predominantly white college or institution? What is it like for you to navigate like being safe at parties or other places where you are no longer with your high school friends and you don't know the people that you're at college with? So seeing those conversations actually manifest to like students having the tools to protect themselves and to look out for each other and feel equipped to have those conversations around race or sexuality or all these other things feels like a huge win. And it's kind of like checking that box as a mentor for what critical consciousness means and then all those kind of like skill building. I can really talk all day about module 5 because that's the one that I just did. So it feels like closest to me because I'm like thinking a lot about my kids in college now. But I think that's like a good snapshot, and obviously I can talk more. But one thing that might be helpful is to just, if you go to the next slide, talk a little bit about evaluation. So we're in the 6th version of what the curriculum is. And it's really been great to get a chance to see how it's evolved over time. And all of that is really intentional around the feedback that we're getting. So we've been able to do student focus groups and basically every single group mentor, and this is going to be the training that we have for the new mentors doing this, is you go to a session, you run the session, you as a good mentor are taking mental notes or actually written notes of like what's working and what's not working. After the session, there's like an online form that you fill out called a mentor feedback form, where we instantly kind of put, it's like a brain dump checking all these boxes of what we did or didn't do well. And then we also go into Copilot and have like, so Alex can speak to how Alyssa and I are different, but I have pages of notes in my Copilot specifically around certain students or how activities worked or didn't work. And we're able to kind of like sift through those and figure out how we can make the curriculum better. Yeah, so one of the biggest takeaways for me as a mentor and thinking about how to better support new mentors in this role, in the training piece, is thinking about how there's many different approaches to get at those intended outcomes. So when we were doing the whole evaluation piece, we always talked about like fidelity. That was like always the conversation, is to make sure that we're following the curriculum. And basically the biggest takeaway is that you can, like I said, reach those outcomes with a different approach. So a lot of it, as a good mentor, is being able to recognize like what the group needs. So if there was something that came up in the community or in the school, was being able to pause and adapt, or if there was some dynamic that was happening among students within the group, it's important to meet them where they are. So there were times where we didn't get a chance to do all of the things that we outlined, or we were able to shift them a little bit. So maybe we had them originally doing a drawing activity, but people needed to get up and move. Or maybe we were doing a one-on-one writing, and it actually made more sense to us for us to have a conversation out loud about it as a group. And so if you look on the right side, you can kind of look at the session structure, and this is kind of what it always followed. We did a welcome, how's everyone doing? People are like shuffling into the room. We did a group check-in, which was like a pulse on where people were individually, as well as like I started implementing like what's happening in your school and your community. So it was kind of like a little check-in around like, this crazy thing happened at your school, or like there was something that happened in your neighborhood. We'd run through these different activities, and then we go over any logistics. So that could be like signing up for check-ins with the one-on-one. It could be something college related, a lot of college access stuff. Who ended up, mentors are obviously supporting with that. If we had events that were coming up, kind of all of the above. And that was for all students, but also like one-on-one. Just it felt good to always kind of like get their feedback around what was working and what wasn't working. So I look forward to how that process continues. I can keep going, or I don't know if there's like questions that are more relevant to the actual curriculum or this like design and development piece that might be helpful for people to jump in now. Y'all are good?
I'm going to speak to the mic. So you mentioned how the GMP curriculum maps to our program model. Is that different than how it was working with students one-on-one? Did conversations with the traditional one-on-one model not follow that sort of like preparing for spring trips, like talking about, you know, the transition to college, or is this different simply because it's in a group format, or different, like a different approach to structuring and planning for mentoring conversations?
So I think I have my answer, and I'm sure if you ask other mentors, they would be able to tell you what their experience was in their training in terms of supporting kids hitting these programmatic goals. So there's definitely, in the one-on-one mentoring, there's definitely like getting ready for your trip, and there's like a one-pager and a training that you go through of like how to talk to students around that. Or if there's a particular event coming, you're kind of like tracking to make sure that they're hitting all the buckets. Are they handing in all their paperwork, all that kind of stuff. For me, I think what added a layer of structure and also like built-in support was that with this curriculum, it made it so that students were processing, it was like normalizing the fact that they're all going through this together, and would like support their learning almost at a faster rate, because all the questions that are coming up, they're not like siloed individually. So it's not like I'm talking to Gabby today and like she has a million questions, and then I talk to another student the next day and they have the same questions. It's like we're all doing it together as a group, so they're able to, one, relate to each other and connect about these new experiences or in the processing of it. And I think we're actually better at reaching, in my opinion, these like programmatic goals, because we're able to like logistically collect paperwork in person and see them in person. We're able to like see on their face and body language if there's particular things that are coming up, like anxieties around upcoming trips or challenges around the transition to college. So I think all these things are happening in the one-on-one. I just think it's better in the group setting, in my opinion, and I think our students would probably say the same thing. One example that really comes to mind from this session, or from this like most recent session with my students, is we were doing a ton of college access stuff, and we were walking through different types of loans. So we would talk about unsubsidized and subsidized, or as I say, unhappy, unsubsidized. It had like a big, like sad face. Anyway, so we were talking through all of those things, and having students look at a sample award letter, and it was kind of like super overwhelming. All the kids are first gen. They're kind of like, I don't understand this. We're walking through the whole thing and talking through like what these different payment options would look like. And then I kind of realized that like it felt like the group was just telling me what I wanted to hear. So I just took a complete time out and stopped the session and was just like, raise your hand if you're going to go to the most affordable, like cheapest school. And like the whole group raises their hand. And I'm like, all right, let's take a time out, pause this session. Something that I would never be able to do in a one-on-one is to see like, what does this actually mean for you as a group coming from this shared space where you all, pretty much all the students are Latinx and first gen, coming from the same town, same community, a lot of the same questions, concerns are coming up for them. So something like that, again, a mentor would be able to do one-on-one, but they wouldn't be able to have that same impact, I think, that the students get from learning from each other and being a community. So I don't know if that answers your question fully.
I'd throw one more thing in there, Brenda, is that we, like in addition to the thematic like trajectory of our students and mapping that against the program manual, we also had an intended outcome for each session. So one example is like increased social responsibility or increased network of resources and relationships, right? Like as our kind of short-term outcomes. And for each session, we had an articulated outcome, and mentors would report on how well they think they promoted that based on the group's response, and students would weigh in their surveys too. So we were also measuring that in addition to the like concrete curriculum mapped along it too. And Kristen, maybe we can spend 5 more minutes in this curriculum area here before we move forward.
Cool. Other questions, thoughts? Cool. I'll keep it moving then. If we go to, unless there's something I'm definitely missing, I was going to move to the next slide. Alex, thoughts? Cool. Okay. So I don't know what your guys' orientation have been around what critical mentoring is, but similar, what I described, I guess, in that sample or example I gave, I think is one example of building critical consciousness, which is something that the group is uniquely able to support and develop for our students. So what does that actually mean? So when we talk about trying to get this outcome of social responsibility, where students feel more committed to giving back or just committed to their communities, or however they kind of frame this idea of being socially responsible, which we realize could mean a bunch of different things. That could mean like, I'm socially responsible because I'm going to college and I'm going to make an impact in my family, or I'm socially responsible because I'm doing a community service program, whatever it might be. This is kind of a little trajectory. You can see this map of what are the steps that have to happen to get there. So increased critical consciousness is a key step in order to reach that social responsibility. And if you see this little circle, these are kind of like the 4 different phases or cycle, I guess, the different elements that are part of that. And they aren't necessarily in order and can kind of like weave in to each other. So there was like a really intentional process that went through this. So when critical mentoring was identified as a goal, the team, this is before my time, met with Stacy and connected with Dr. Rod Watts, who's like a lead researcher and consultant in critical consciousness, to figure out how critical mentoring can be implemented within the pre-existing curriculum. And then what are ways that we can build that in even more so, whether it's like certain questions that we can build or activities. And these are the 4 things that kind of came out of that. So critical reflection, self-efficacy, critical action, collective identification. So group mentoring uniquely promotes the collective identification because students are, like I said, asking these questions and being able to work through some of these bigger issues as a group. So they're building on that shared experience of being in the same school and in the same community, being able to talk through these things. So eventually I'll like go through what a sample session would look like, if that makes it clear. But something for me that helps in figuring out how this might be different than what's happening in the one-on-one is like way back in May, there was like that email that came out around depth mentoring. And the things that I kind of pulled out from that is like, critical mentoring, which is basically like having students better understand the systems that they're part of, and what that means to them and their identity and their community, and then building the skills to effectively navigate those things, which sounds like, what does that mean? But I think mentors are doing that in the one-on-one, and in the curriculum, we're just doing it more intentionally. So maybe there's an experience a student has that they choose to bring to their mentor in a one-on-one check-in that has to do with their identity, or, you know, yeah, a mentor would be able to help them talk through that. And then in the group mentoring, it's like we're bringing it to the forefront, basically. So our students are going through these activities and being challenged to kind of work through that together as a group. So yeah, it's really night and day. So I don't know if I'm doing the best at explaining the difference between the one-on-one and the groups, but from a mentoring perspective, it really felt like, wow, we're getting there. And especially to Alex's point in figuring out like what makes Summer Search unique from other mentoring organizations that exist out there is this. Like, this is the piece, I would say, in my opinion, is like the golden nugget, is that like, we're not volunteers who are just like, you know, it's great to talk on the phone with kids and say like, what do you want to talk about? What is this? And this feels like, no, we're like cutting edge mentoring in the sense that like kids are really going there. They're really doing the work as a group to figure out like, what does it mean to be brown and first gen and going to college? What does it mean to be like, we had multiple kids come out in our groups. Like, there's just like so many things that were happening. Not to say that that wouldn't have happened in a one-on-one, but that I think all those factors facilitated them being able to reach this critical consciousness that leads to social responsibility that is not as likely to happen in a one-on-one when kids are siloed and not working and learning together. I don't know if people have questions specifically around that, or if you want to move on to the curriculum examples. We can keep going. Alex is going to talk a little bit about this cute collage.
Oh yeah, I'll just tee this up real quick. So this is an activity our students did in junior year where they created this is one of the activities in the session where they created their college identity collage, and these are their actual examples. This is from our Oakland High Wing 1 group, so class of 2017. And I just wanted to share this both so you could see these images, which I think are very powerful, and also because this activity is referenced again in the session that Kristen's going to be telling you about next. Okay, that's it. Go ahead, Kristen.
So this is one of my favorite activities. If we switch to the next slide, human barometer, and you can do this a couple of different ways. So you can have people like get up in a room and like move to different corners of the room depending on if they like totally agree, totally disagree, or kind of if they're somewhere in the middle. Or if kids are like, I don't know, they're teenagers. Sometimes they're like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm like tired and lazy. So we'll like do it on paper. But so these are some of the sample statements and debrief questions that came up from that particular session that we had, which is the spring of senior year. So yeah, I just want to in terms of the foundation that they have with each other, it's just like really cool, to be honest, as a mentor, because they've been working together now for years, since sophomore year. So they're into the flow, they come to session, they know that we're going to like dig deep and do all these things. So some of these questions might feel a little heavy if you've like not been to a session before, and this is what we do. So, so some of the statements are, I think anyone who wants to should be able to immigrate to the United States. I think police keep me safe. It's okay for high school and college students to be sexually active. I do or do not feel informed about the gender spectrum. So these are some of the things that came up, and we had students either physically move, or another group, I think we did it on paper, and people were able to like write where they were and then engage with each other about what that meant, which again, my schools are really different. So it was like very different discussions that came out of that. But also incredible to have the students reflect on like this group that they had spent so much time with and built this connection with, to see like how they each thought differently about it. And we actually just like went around and shared our answers. So I think that's the other shout out to hopefully having co-facilitation, because it felt really great to have a small group of kids you know, go through these like really heavy questions. So we went through all of them. Yeah, I mean, so many things stick out, but I think what was most helpful again, as a mentor who's trying to set kids up for the next step, was that practical question at the end of like, what would this activity or what does this bring up for you, and how is it different now than it would be on a college campus or at your job or in an internship or whatever it might be, because they're very comfortable in their schools and high school spaces, in the sense that it's predictable and familiar. They might not be having the best high school experience. Obviously, high school's hard, but that was the biggest thing that I think, to this like quote that I read from Cindy earlier, is like, I have another one from my student Gael, who talked about how she said, I really like the groups because I'm able to experience life through someone else's shoes. So I not only think differently, but I get help and advice of what it would be like to think about it in a different way. And I think that like, this is one example of a session where students are like, oh man, I didn't think about it in that way. Or this means something different for me because of my identity than it does for you. And now I can kind of bridge that gap to be more empathetic and be more socially responsible. And then also think of what that means for them in a different space. So they're going to be on a college campus with strangers, in classes with people they don't know. And how do they want to show up to that space, and how are they going to navigate the challenges when these types of questions or issues are presented in a group that they're not familiar with. So again, this is why I'm like obviously drank the Kool-Aid and appreciate all the things that is happening in the critical mentoring world. Yeah, and it was just like a huge win to be able to see students not only talk about this in that particular session, and then it shows up. That's usually how it works. We do this activity in a group session. Some kids will really deep dive. Other kids will be like a little more hesitant. And then in the one-on-ones, you'll like really get the juicy stuff. And then it'll be even juicier the following week because kids have had time to like think about it, process it a little bit one-on-one, and then they're ready to be like, actually, this is what I really think. And it's just awesome to see that like within a month that you can introduce a question, and like by the end of the month, kids are in a totally different place and have pushed each other to get there. Yeah. What else? Oh, I'm going to switch on to evaluation. I don't know if there's anything else that people want to ask or throw out before we make that transition. Cool.
I know we spent a lot of time here around the curriculum and the student experience, but that's for two big reasons. One, because this is the part that like you can read about the evaluation and our results. This is the part that really requires a voice, especially from our mentor and Kristen, to help bring you into the experience of our students, and that's a little less tangible than some of the other information that's included in this presentation today. So thanks, Kristen, for sharing those student voices and your experience too. That'll take us into the evaluation section that I won't spend a lot of time on, but again, I'll share this deck after the call. I just wanted to go over two of the slides in this section. So what did we want to learn with this pilot? So this 4-year pilot included a really rigorous evaluation aimed at answering 3 things. One, is hybrid mentoring feasible? So can we implement it? And to get at that, we asked 2 questions. Will youth report mediators of positive outcomes for group mentoring? Things like group cohesion that I mentioned earlier. So how connected do the students feel to each other and to their mentor? And can mentors maintain high levels of youth development indicators? So this is what Kristen was referring to in the mentor feedback form that mentors complete after every session, and they're rating students against these, like how engaged are the youth, how close are they in terms of their relationship building, how affective are they being toward their mentor. So is hybrid mentoring feasible? Can we do it? 2, for the youth in the hybrid model, are their outcomes going to be as large or larger than students in our traditional model? What we found is yes, they're as large or larger than students in the traditional model. And then finally, is hybrid mentoring more cost effective than one-on-one mentoring? Yes, and it's less of a cost savings than we initially projected, but what came out of this is all of the benefits that the students and staff reported in terms of satisfaction that we measured in focus groups, that we measured in surveys throughout the lifetime of the pilot. So at the end of the day, this is the model that works best for our students and staff and promotes critical mentoring in a way that our one-on-one model doesn't. So those are the things to highlight most. Next slide, just overview. So the headline statement would be that hybrid mentoring does incur cost savings and demonstrates comparable student engagement and increased time in mentoring. So one of our most compelling impact stats would be that students in the hybrid model participated in 3.5 times more mentoring time than students in our traditional model. So, you know, that's huge, because the hypothesis is the more time they get with each other and their mentor, the higher their outcomes, right? The more those experiences facilitate outcomes that students want for themselves and that we want for them. And then also our retention rates are comparable. We just looked at retention again in May. We're looking at it now as we finalize our report, and there's no statistically significant difference in retention between our pilot students and our traditional students. Our students report positive relationships with each other, with their mentor, and we collected a lot of that data qualitatively in focus groups and then quantitatively in surveys. Right now, so the next two slides I won't review, but you can reference them. These include quotes from our students both from our spring 2017 survey and our spring 2018 survey, the open-ended responses that capture why students like the groups and also what they anticipate gaining out of the groups in the future. So you can review those on your own. What we're working on right now is our final report. Oh, and slide 18. Thanks. Sorry, Brenda. I'm not doing a good job. Thanks. You're tracking with me really well. Kristen spoke to this already about some of the benefits, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But let me see if there are anything she didn't speak about. Oh, I guess one thing related to critical mentoring that both Alyssa and Kristen and our previous mentors in Boston spoke to is that there's a marked shift in the power dynamics, because the mentors are in the student space, in their schools, in their communities, and the students have active choice in how they're showing up in the sessions. They do in the one-on-one too, but there's something different about the mentors going to the students versus the constant expectation that students are calling their mentors.
Can I actually also just jump in really quickly and say that, like, a lot of people ask, like, oh man, like, what if the group setting isn't right? If a student is really introverted or might not feel comfortable showing up in a group setting, and I know Alyssa would probably say this too if she was here, is that it's actually much easier to hide in a group than it is on a call. So if you're a student who feels hesitant or uncomfortable talking about a particular thing, you're just in the one-on-one, you're just alone with your mentor, and can really sit in that awkward silence for only so long. Whereas in a group setting, I think to Alex's point, kids have a little bit more of a choice if they want to say more or say less. And I think that helps them build comfort not only with their mentor, but also with the group. So just want to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Good. I'm glad you added that. Yeah. And one other thing I'll give voice to here is that there are so many examples from the pilot that speak to the strength of the mentor and summer search relationship in the community facilitated by these groups. So like a lot of students with mental health concerns that have come up in the pilot, it's so much easier because our staff have deep, consistent relationships with staff at the schools. And there are so many examples of a counselor and a referral partner and a teacher and our staff coming together to collectively support a student. That shows up also with families. Our mentors show up at schools. And I think about Claire, who would almost every week see the mother of one of her students at the school, and the relationship that really built in support of the child. So there's lots of examples of that are different when our mentors are on the phone and don't have access to other relationships and other people who believe in students. So next slide. Right now, we're working on our final pilot evaluation due at the end of October to MSCF. And these are some of the things that we're looking at. What this will include is a kind of a comprehensive take at our student outcomes. So things like what was attendance in the group sessions, which has been high throughout the pilot. Outputs like trip attendance and spring event attendance, FAFSA completion. So once that report is done, we're going to be able to make that available to you so you can see the final results and cite that in any future proposals. All right. In the 5 minutes we have left, we're not going to get into this implementation content, so we could maybe have a separate call if what's included on these slides doesn't feel like it's giving you a really good picture of what implementation looks like. The headline here is that we're proposing administering a survey across all sites in the network and gauging every person's readiness for hybrid mentoring in terms of what they anticipate are their personal benefits, what do they anticipate are the benefits for their site and for the organization if we move in this direction of hybrid mentoring. And what we're looking for in analyzing that survey is alignment between staff at all levels in the organization and a general consensus that people feel ready for this change, they believe in this change, and they feel equipped to make the change. That survey will also likely include some other factors around perception of performance, like program performance, financial performance, and we'll use all that information to help identify the order of site rollout. If there's more than one site that is primed and poised to roll out hybrid mentoring, then perhaps we'll consider rolling out at more than one site next year. So there's more coming, but that is information that Nick and hybrid mentoring implementation team will bring to the EDs and PSLs for input before we administer that survey. So just wanted to share that. And then the other piece is that we are advocating for a full team and nested teams at the local and national level to support implementation and that high quality, high fidelity that we were talking about. The last slide in the deck after the implementation info includes a couple resources. One is a 2-page overview of hybrid mentoring that Sharon and I worked on together. The others are the links to the proposal, the winning proposal from the Bay Area team to core it to support hybrid mentoring, and then also the link to the research that I referenced in this presentation. Throughout the deck, you'll also notice some links where you can go and learn more, whether it's about curriculum or our evaluation. So I'll share that after the call. We have 2 minutes left. Maybe we could share a couple questions that come up or reactions to getting this information. I know we covered a lot of ground.
This is Lexi. That was super helpful.
Hey.
Thank you both.
Glad to hear that. Thanks, Lexi. Other questions or other things you can think of, and if we don't get to I don't know how many thoughts we get to on this call, but things that you like or need from us to help facilitate your work in promoting this with funders and donors. If you have immediate thoughts now, share them. If not, please email me, and we'll work on getting you those resources.
Sharon, I just want to reiterate gratitude to you guys for this great work. It'll be really exciting in the final report to report back to MSDS that we're rolling out this initiative to all sites. Like you could have said.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, we told them, we did tell them via email, and we'll talk more about it in our report. And also this week when we see Janice and I will be there at the convening, so we'll get to celebrate that in person with them too. They were happy to hear it. Okay, again, this is just the start of a conversation and our continued partnership with you all. We appreciate you. This wouldn't have been possible without your efforts, and I know that our future of implementing won't be possible without you. So we want to keep partnering and keep communicating. Let us know what else you need.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.